The ancient dragons had not stirred for 3,000 cycles. Deep within the crystalline caverns of Valdris Prime, their massive forms lay coiled in eternal slumber, scales that once gleamed like molten starlight, now dulled by centuries of accumulated cosmic dust. The Elder Council of the Galactic Federation had long since declared them extinct, a convenient lie that allowed the current powers to strip mine the outer systems without interference. But dragons do not die easily, and these particular dragons had simply chosen to sleep. They had grown weary of the endless deceptions that plagued the galaxy. The Zelhari spoke of peace while building weapons of mass destruction. The Korthok preached unity while enslaving lesser species. The Nexari claimed to be scholars while erasing inconvenient histories. Every species that approached the dragons came bearing honeyed words that masked bitter intentions. So the dragons withdrew. They sealed their caverns with barriers of pure energy and chose the dreamless sleep of the deeply disappointed. Let the galaxy tear itself apart with its lies, they reasoned. When truth returned to the stars, perhaps they would wake. The barrier was designed to filter out all communication. No transmission could penetrate the crystalline walls. No telepathic plea could reach the slumbering minds within. The dragons had heard every form of deception the galaxy could produce, and they wanted no more of it. The barrier recognized lies by the very molecular structure of dishonest intent, turning away all who approached with false hearts. For 3 millennia, nothing had been strong enough to wake them. Captain Elena Vasquez of the human exploration vessel, determination, never expected to find herself crashed on a restricted world. The navigational data had been corrupted during their jump through the unstable wormhole near the Sagittarius Arm, and her ship's AI had made an emergency landing on the nearest habitable planet. What it hadn't mentioned was that Valdris Prime was forbidden territory, marked as a dead world in every star chart. The crash had been brutal. Half her crew of 30 was dead, and most of the survivors were badly injured. Elena herself had suffered a concussion and 3 broken ribs, but she was still mobile. More importantly, she was still thinking clearly enough to know they were in serious trouble. The Determination's distress beacon was damaged beyond repair. Their long-range communications were completely offline. The ship's hull had been cracked in 6 places, and the life support systems were failing. In the harsh mathematics of survival, they had perhaps 10 days before the situation became critical. But Elena's immediate concern was much more personal and infinitely more heartbreaking. Little Marcus Chen was 5 years old, an orphan they had rescued from the destroyed colony of New Guangzhou before the Korthok slavers could claim him. The boy had been traveling with them to the human settlement on Terra Nova, where distant relatives had agreed to take him in. He had been sleeping in the reinforced passenger compartment when they crashed, and while the safety systems had protected him from physical harm, the psychological trauma was proving more difficult to manage. Marcus had not stopped crying since the crash 6 hours ago. It was not the normal crying of a frightened child, though he was certainly frightened. It was something deeper, more primal. The boy seemed to sense, with the inexplicable intuition that children sometimes possessed, that they were all going to die on this empty world. Elena tried everything she could think of to comfort him. She told him stories about brave spacemen and friendly aliens. She shared her rations with him and let him play with her father's old compass that she carried for luck. She even sang him the lullabies her own mother had sung to her back on Earth. Nothing worked. Marcus continued to sob with a sound that seemed to come from the very depths of his small soul. The other survivors were growing increasingly agitated. Chief Engineer Rodriguez suggested sedating the boy, but Dr. Sarah Kim refused to waste their limited medical supplies on what she called emotional regulation. Security Officer Thompson was more direct in his assessment. "The kid's going to drive us all crazy before we die of oxygen deprivation." Elena understood their frustration. They were all scared, all facing the very real possibility that this barren world would become their grave. The constant sound of a crying child was like salt in an already painful wound. But every time she looked at Marcus, she saw her younger brother who had died in the Martian plague when she was 16. She would not abandon this child, no matter how difficult the circumstances became. As the day wore on, the boy's cries grew louder and more desperate. It was as if he was calling out to someone, though there was no one on this dead world to hear him. The sound echoed strangely in the thin atmosphere of Valdris Prime, seeming to travel much farther than it should have. Sometimes, Elena thought she heard an answering echo from the crystal formations in the distance, but she dismissed it as acoustic tricks caused by the planet's unusual mineral composition. Dr. Kim ran another diagnostic on their situation that evening and delivered the news Elena had been dreading. "Life support will fail completely in 8 days," she announced to the assembled survivors. "The air recyclers are damaged beyond our ability to repair, and we're losing atmosphere faster than the emergency reserves can compensate." "What about the emergency beacon?" asked Rodriguez. "Still dead. The crash damaged the quantum transmitter beyond recognition. Even if we had replacement parts, which we don't, it would take weeks to rebuild it properly." Elena felt the weight of command settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. 23 people were looking to her for a miracle she could not provide. They were stranded on a world so remote that no one even remembered why it was restricted. Their ship was broken, their communications were dead, and their life support was failing. And still, little Marcus continued to cry. That night, as the others tried to sleep in the cramped emergency shelter they had rigged in the least damaged section of the ship, Elena sat with the boy and tried once more to comfort him. She held him close and spoke to him in the gentle voice her own mother had used. "I know you're scared, Marcus. We're all scared, but crying won't help us right now. We need to be brave and think of solutions." But Marcus was not crying because he was scared, though he certainly was frightened. He was crying because he could feel something vast and sad sleeping beneath the crystal mountains, something that had been sleeping for a very long time. He could not have explained this feeling if anyone had asked him, because he was only 5 years old and did not have the words. All he knew was that the sleeping things were important, and that they needed to wake up, and that his tears were the only way he knew to call to them. In the sealed caverns beneath the crystal peaks, something stirred for the first time in 3,000 years. It was barely perceptible at first, just a slight quickening in the rhythm of ancient hearts. The dragons had been dreaming of a time when truth walked among the stars, when words matched deeds and intentions were as clear as starlight. But something was different about this sound that penetrated their eternal rest. It was not like the carefully crafted messages they had rejected countless times before. There was no deception in it, no hidden agenda. It was pure and honest in a way they had not heard for millennia. It was the sound of genuine fear and genuine need, unfiltered by politics or artifice. It was the cry of a child who did not know how to lie, calling out into the darkness for someone, anyone, to help. The eldest of the dragons, a massive gold-scaled female named Ether Moon, lifted her great head slightly in her sleep. Her dream mind touched the edges of the sound, tasting its emotional resonance. There was truth in this crying, honest truth, without any trace of manipulation or deceit. It had been so long since she had encountered such clarity that for a moment she thought it might be an illusion. But the crying continued, and gradually other dragons began to stir as well. Starfire. The crimson twitched his massive tail. Void Walker Seren opened one great silver eye. Even ancient Drakemore, the eldest of them all, began to emerge from the deepest levels of hibernation. They were not fully awake yet, but they were no longer completely asleep. The barrier that had protected them from 3,000 years of lies was still intact, but this sound was passing through it as if it were no more substantial than morning mist. Because it was not a lie. It was a truth so pure and desperate that their ancient magic recognized it as something worthy of attention. Elena did not sleep that night. She sat with Marcus in her lap, gently stroking his dark hair and trying to project a calm she did not feel. The boy had finally stopped crying around midnight, but his small body continued to shake with exhaustion and fear. "It's going to be okay," she whispered to him, knowing it was probably not true, but feeling compelled to say it anyway. "Someone will find us. Humans don't just disappear. There are people out there who care about us, people who will keep looking until they find us." As dawn broke over the crystal peaks of Valdris Prime, Elena carried Marcus outside the ship to watch the sunrise. The sky was a strange purple color due to the planet's unusual atmospheric composition, and the crystal formations caught and refracted the light in spectacular ways. It was beautiful in an alien, lonely sort of way. "Look, Marcus," she said softly. "Even on a world where no one lives, there's still beauty. There's still hope." But as she spoke, she noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. In the distance, near the largest cluster of crystal formations, she could swear she saw movement. Just for a moment, something large and golden had shifted in the shadows between the crystal spires. Elena blinked and looked again. But whatever she had seen was gone. Probably just a trick of the light, she told herself. Her concussion was making her see things that were not there. But deep beneath the crystal mountains, Ethermoon opened both of her great golden eyes for the first time in 3,000 years and began the slow process of truly waking up. Ethermoon rose from her crystal bed with movements that shook the mountain itself. 3 millennia of sleep had not weakened her. But the process of awakening was slow and deliberate. Her golden scales, each one the size of a human shield, began to shimmer with inner light as ancient energies stirred within her massive frame. Around her, the other dragons were beginning to wake as well. The caverns that had been silent for so long now echoed with the sounds of shifting stone and rustling wings. Starfire stretched his crimson wings, sending small avalanches cascading down the crystal walls. Voidwalker. Seren's silver scales began to glow with ethereal light, while Drakemore's ancient bronze form slowly uncoiled from around the central pillar where he had slept. But they were cautious. 3,000 years of disappointment had taught them to be wary of false hopes. They extended their senses carefully, probing beyond their mountain sanctuary to understand what had called them from their slumber. What they found surprised them. The source of the honest crying was not one of the established galactic species they had grown to distrust. It was something new, something they had never encountered before. The emotional resonance was unlike anything in their vast memory banks. Where other species broadcast thoughts layered with deception and self-interest, these new minds were startlingly direct. Even the adults among them thought in patterns that were refreshingly straightforward. But it was the young one whose cries had first penetrated their barriers that truly captured their attention. His mind was like clear water, untainted by the sophisticated lies that older beings learned to tell themselves and others. When he was afraid, he was purely afraid. When he was sad, he was completely sad. When he called out for help, he meant exactly what he said. Ethermoon had forgotten that such honesty could exist. She began to move through the crystal caverns, her massive form flowing like liquid gold through passages that had been carved by dragon claws eons ago. The other dragons followed, their curiosity overriding the caution that had kept them hidden for so long. At the Determination crash site, Elena was trying to maintain morale while secretly calculating how much longer they could survive. Dr. Kim's latest assessment was even grimmer than before. The life support damage was accelerating, and they now had perhaps 6 days before the air became unbreathable. "Captain," called Rodriguez from the engineering section, "I think I might have found something useful in the wreckage." Elena hurried over to where the chief engineer was examining a twisted piece of metal. "What is it?" "Part of the emergency beacon transmitter. It's more intact than I thought. If I can jury-rig it with some power cells from the auxiliary systems, I might be able to get out a single-burst transmission." "How long would that take?" 2 days, maybe 3 if I run into complications. But, Captain—" Rodriguez hesitated. "Even if it works, the signal would be incredibly weak. The chances of anyone receiving it are practically zero." "Practically zero is better than absolutely zero," Elena replied. "Do it." As Rodriguez began his work, Elena noticed that Marcus had started crying again. The boy had been quiet most of the morning, but now his sobs echoed through the damaged ship with renewed intensity. Dr. Kim approached with a sedative injector, but Elena waved her away. "Let him cry," she said quietly. "If these are our last days, he deserves to express how he feels about it." What Elena did not realize was that Marcus was not crying about their situation. He was crying because he could feel the vast mines stirring beneath the crystal mountains, and something in his 5-year-old consciousness recognized them as important. He could not have explained the sensation if anyone had asked, but he knew with absolute certainty that help was coming from the sleeping giants in the earth. The first sign that something extraordinary was happening came at midday. Security Officer Thompson was on watch duty when he saw them in the distance, massive shapes moving between the crystal formations. At first he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, but the movements were too deliberate and purposeful to be illusions. "Captain Vasquez, you need to see this," he called over the communicator. Elena climbed to the observation deck that Rodriguez had rigged in the least damaged section of the ship's hull. Through the reinforced viewport, she could see them clearly now. Dragons. Actual dragons, like something from the old Earth legends, moving gracefully between the crystal spires. They were enormous, each one easily the size of her ship. Their scales caught the purple sunlight and threw it back in brilliant displays of color. Gold and crimson and silver and bronze. They moved with an ancient dignity that took Elena's breath away. "My God," whispered Dr. Kim, who had joined them at the viewport. "They're beautiful." "They're also heading straight for us," Thompson observed with military practicality. Elena felt her pulse quicken, but not with fear. There was something about the way the dragons moved that suggested intelligence and purpose rather than predatory threat. They were not stalking prey, they were approaching deliberately, as if they had something specific in mind. "Should we arm ourselves?" asked Thompson. "With what?" Elena replied. "Our sidearms against creatures that size? Besides, if they wanted to harm us, we'd already be dead." The dragons stopped about 100 meters from the crashed ship and arranged themselves in what was clearly a formal formation. The largest of them, a magnificent gold-scaled female, stepped forward and fixed her enormous eyes on the human vessel. When Ethermoon spoke, her voice resonated directly in their minds rather than through the air. The mental contact was gentle but unmistakable, carrying with it the weight of vast age and wisdom. "Greetings, children of the stars. We are the dragons of Valdris Prime. We have slept long and dreamed of a time when truth would return to the galaxy. Your young ones' honest tears have awakened us from our rest." Elena felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. First contact with an unknown species was supposed to follow specific protocols, involve trained xenolinguists and diplomatic specialists. It was not supposed to happen to a stranded exploration crew on a supposedly dead world, but she was the captain, and her crew was looking to her for leadership. She stepped forward and tried to project the confidence she did not feel. "I am Captain Elena Vasquez of the human vessel Determination. We are crashed here by accident, not by choice. Our ship is damaged and our life support is failing. We could use help." Ethermoon tilted her great head thoughtfully. The honesty in the human's words was refreshing after millennia of diplomatic doublespeak. There was no attempt to hide their desperate situation, no false bravado or manipulation, just a straightforward acknowledgement of need. "Humans," the dragon mused aloud. "We have not encountered your species before. You are new to this region of space." "We're explorers," Elena replied. "We were charting new systems for potential colonization when we had to make an emergency landing here. We didn't know this world was inhabited." "It is not inhabited. In the sense you mean. We have chosen isolation for many centuries. The other species of this galaxy have proven themselves untrustworthy." Elena sensed vast disappointment behind those words, disappointment so deep and pervasive that it had led an entire species to withdraw from the galaxy. "What did they do to you?" "They lied," Ethermoon said simply. "They came to us with words of friendship and peace, but their true intentions were conquest and exploitation. Every species we encountered spoke false words. The Zelhari claimed to seek knowledge but wanted only our technology. The Korthak preached unity while planning domination. The Nexari promised cultural exchange while plotting to steal our histories. We grew weary of deception and chose to sleep until truth returned to the stars." The pain in the dragon's mental voice was unmistakable. Elena found herself responding not as a starship captain, but as one being speaking to another. "I'm sorry that happened to you. But not all species are the same. Humans, we're not perfect. But we try to be honest in our dealings, especially with our children." At the mention of children, Ethermoon's attention focused sharply on the ship. "The young one who cried. He calls to us still, though his tears have stopped. May we see him?" Elena hesitated. Every protocol she had ever learned said that exposing a civilian, especially a child, to first contact was dangerous. But these dragons had already proven they meant no immediate harm. And Marcus seemed to have some kind of connection with them that she did not understand. "Marcus is just a little boy," she said carefully. "He's an orphan we rescued. The crash has traumatized him. If you want to meet him, please be gentle." Ethermoon lowered her great head in what was unmistakably a bow. "We would never harm a child. Children are precious because they have not yet learned to lie." Elena made a decision that would have horrified her superiors, but felt absolutely right in the moment. "Rodriguez, bring Marcus up here, but stay close to him." When Rodriguez emerged from the ship with Marcus in his arms, the effect on the dragons was immediate and profound. The great beasts seemed to straighten, their scales brightening with inner light. Ethermoon's golden eyes fixed on the small boy with an expression of wonder. Marcus, for his part, stopped crying entirely. He stared at the dragons with the fearless curiosity that only very young children possessed, then pointed at Ethermoon and said in his clear, high voice, "Pretty dragon." The simplicity and honesty of the statement hit the ancient beings like a physical blow. After 3,000 years of carefully parsed diplomatic language and hidden agendas, a child had looked at them and simply said what he saw. Starfire laughed, a sound like distant thunder. "Pretty dragon? When did anyone last speak to us with such directness?" Ethermoon moved closer, lowering her massive head until she was almost at eye level with the boy. "Hello, little one. I am Ethermoon. What is your name?" "Marcus," the boy said without fear. "Are you going to help us? The ship is broken and everyone is sad." Again, that devastating honesty. No attempt to negotiate or bargain, no hidden meanings, just a child asking if help was coming. "Yes, Marcus," Ethermoon said gently. "We are going to help you." She turned to address Elena and the other humans who had gathered. Your young one has given us something we had forgotten existed, the sound of truth spoken without calculation. We will repair your ship and ensure your safe passage to wherever you wish to go." Elena felt tears of relief beginning to form in her eyes. "Thank you. But why? You said you chose isolation because other species disappointed you. What makes humans different?" Ethermoon considered the question carefully. "Perhaps nothing in the long term, but this child has not learned to lie, and the rest of you speak with unusual directness for star-traveling beings. You may prove to be like the others eventually, but today, in this moment, you have shown us something we had lost hope of seeing again." "What's that?" Elena asked. The ancient dragon's golden eyes were ancient and sad, but also touched with something that might have been hope. The possibility that truth can still exist among the stars. As the purple sun began to set over the crystal formations of Valdris Prime, the dragons began to circle the crashed human ship, their massive forms gliding through the air with impossible grace. Elena watched in amazement as they worked, using abilities that seemed to blend advanced technology with something that could only be called magic. Tomorrow, she knew, would bring revelations that would change humanity's place in the galaxy forever. But tonight, for the first time since the crash, she felt something she had not dared to feel before: hope. Dawn on Valdris Prime revealed a sight that would have seemed impossible just days before. The ancient dragons worked around the crashed human vessel with careful precision, their massive claws manipulating tools of energy and light that seemed to bend reality itself. Metal flowed like liquid under their touch, rejoining and strengthening. Crystalline components grew from nothing, forming perfect replacements for the ship's damaged systems. Elena watched in fascination as Starfire breathed not flame, but pure energy onto the ship's hull, sealing the breaches that had threatened their lives. Voidwalker Seren gestured with one massive claw, and the twisted wreckage of their communication array straightened and reformed itself into something even more sophisticated than the original. "Captain," Dr. Kim said quietly, appearing at Elena's shoulder, "their technology is beyond anything in our databases, if we can understand even a fraction of what they're doing." "We're not here to steal their secrets, Doctor," Elena said firmly. "They're helping us. The least we can do is respect that gift." But Ethermoon had heard the exchange, and she turned her golden gaze toward the two women. "Your doctor speaks of understanding our methods. This is natural curiosity, not deception. We appreciate the distinction." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I didn't want you to think we were trying to take advantage of your kindness. And that very concern proves our initial assessment was correct," Ethermoon replied. "The Zelhari would have already been cataloging our techniques for later exploitation. The Korthak would have demanded we teach them our skills as payment for their future cooperation. You simply worried that we might think badly of your natural scientific interest." As the repairs continued, the dragons began to interact more freely with the human crew. What started as cautious observation evolved into genuine conversation. The humans, despite their desperate situation, showed a remarkable willingness to treat the dragons as individuals rather than obstacles or opportunities. Chief Engineer Rodriguez spent hours discussing technical approaches with Drakemore, the ancient bronze dragon who had been their master craftsman for millennia. Instead of demanding to know how dragon technology worked, Rodriguez shared human engineering principles and described the elegant solutions they had developed for space travel. "Your species builds with impressive efficiency," Drakemore observed as he examined a piece of human computer technology. "These quantum processors are crude by our standards, but they achieve their purpose with remarkable economy of resources." "We've learned to do a lot with a little," Rodriguez replied. "When you're traveling between stars, every gram of weight and every joule of power matters." "Yes, but you have also learned something more important," the ancient dragon said thoughtfully. "You have learned to build things that can be repaired. Your ship may be damaged, but its systems are designed to be maintained and improved. The Nexari built everything to be replaced rather than fixed. They believed that perfection was static, while you understand that it is a process of continuous improvement. Meanwhile, Dr. Kim found herself in deep conversation with Voidwalker Seren about the medical techniques both species had developed. The Silver Dragon was amazed by human adaptability. You have evolved on a single world, yet your bodies can survive in the vacuum of space with minimal technological assistance, Seren noted. Most species require extensive genetic modification to achieve such versatility. We've always been explorers, Kim replied. Even when we were confined to Earth, we found ways to live in environments that should have killed us. Deserts, Arctic wastes, the deep ocean. Mountain peaks where the air is too thin to breathe. We don't just adapt to our environment, we adapt our environment to ourselves. The Korthak do something similar, Seren said, but they destroy what came before in the process. You find ways to coexist with what you encounter. But it was the continued interaction between the dragons and little Marcus that proved most revealing. The boy had no fear of the massive beings, treating them with the same casual acceptance he might show to adults of his own species. When Ethermoon lowered her head so he could pat her golden scales, he did so matter-of-factly, then asked if she was hungry and offered to share his lunch rations. "You are very kind, little one," Ethermoon said gently, "but dragons do not eat the same food as humans." "What do you eat?" Marcus asked with the boundless curiosity of a 5-year-old. "We subsist on the energy patterns of crystalline formations. The mountains themselves provide our nourishment." Marcus considered this seriously, then nodded as if it made perfect sense. "That's why you live in the crystal caves, like how fish live in water because that's what they need." The simplicity of his understanding and his complete lack of judgment about the dragon's alien nature moved the ancient beings profoundly. Here was a mind that could accept difference without fear, strangeness without suspicion. "Tell me about your world, Marcus," Starfire requested as he carefully adjusted the ship's power coupling. "What is Earth like?" Marcus launched into an enthusiastic description that jumped randomly from topic to topic in the way that children's stories do. He talked about snow and beaches and the way cities looked from the windows of flying cars. He described his favorite foods and the games he liked to play and the bedtime stories about brave spacemen that Captain Elena told him. What struck the dragons was not the content of his words, but the emotional texture behind them. When Marcus talked about the family he had lost in the colony attack, his sadness was pure and uncomplicated. When he described the kindness of the ship's crew, his gratitude was absolute. When he spoke of his fears about what would happen to him, his anxiety was honest and unguarded. "The boy's mind is like crystal," Voidwalker Seren observed privately to Ethermoon. "No hidden layers, no false depths. When did we last encounter such clarity of thought?" "Never," Ethermoon replied. "In all our years, across all the species we have known, we have never met beings whose children think so clearly. Perhaps that is the key difference." As the third day of repairs progressed, the dragons began to understand something profound about human nature. These beings were not perfect. They had their fears and doubts, their petty jealousies, and personal ambitions. But they also possessed something that the dragons had forgotten existed: the ability to choose truth, even when lies would be easier. Security Officer Thompson demonstrated this when he approached Ethermoon directly to address a concern that had been bothering him. "I need to ask you something, and I want a straight answer," he said bluntly. "My job is to protect this crew. Are we safe with you? Not just now, but in the long term. If we tell other humans about you, will that bring danger to either of our species?" Ethermoon was taken aback by the directness of the question. The Zelhari would have spent days in careful diplomatic probing before approaching such a sensitive topic. The Korthak would have made demands rather than asking questions. Thompson simply wanted to know the truth, so he could do his job properly. "Your question shows wisdom," she replied honestly. "We withdrew from galactic society because we grew tired of species who approached us with conquest in their hearts and peace on their lips. If humans prove to be the same, then yes, contact between us could eventually lead to conflict." Thompson nodded grimly. "That's what I thought." "So what do we do about it?" "You do exactly what you have been doing," Ethermoon said. "You speak truth, act with honor, and allow your children to remain children instead of training them to be politicians. If humans can maintain these qualities as your civilization expands, then perhaps the galaxy will finally have a species worthy of the stars." On the final day of repairs, Elena stood with Marcus on the observation deck, watching the dragons put the finishing touches on their work. The Determination looked better than new, its hull gleaming with an almost organic perfection that spoke of dragon craftsmanship. "Captain," Marcus said quietly, "the dragons are sad." Elena looked down at the boy in surprise. "Why do you think that?" "They told me they've been sleeping for a really long time because other people were mean to them." "But they're awake now, and they're going to be alone again when we leave." The wisdom of children, Elena reflected, often cuts straight to the heart of complex situations. The dragons had awakened from their self-imposed exile because a human child's honest tears had called to them. Now that child was leaving, and they would return to their crystalline caves, alone, again. Unless... Elena made a decision that would change the course of both species forever. She requested a private audience with Ethermoon and the other dragon elders. When they gathered around the ship that evening, she spoke with the same directness that had characterized all their interactions. "You've given us our lives back," she began. "More than that, you've shown us wonders that will expand human understanding of what's possible in the universe. But I think we might have something to offer you in return." Ethermoon's golden eyes regarded her carefully. "What do you propose?" "Friendship," Elena said simply. "Not an alliance between governments or species. Just friendship between individuals who have found something worth preserving in each other. Marcus will need to continue on to Terra Nova, but the Determination could be reassigned to this sector. We could visit regularly, bring you news of the galaxy, share our discoveries and learn from yours." "And what would prevent this friendship from becoming the same cycle of disappointment we have experienced with other species?" Starfire asked. Elena smiled and gestured toward Marcus, who was sitting nearby playing with his toy spaceship and humming contentedly to himself. "Him," she said, "and children like him. As long as humans remember how to raise children who think clearly and speak honestly, as long as we keep producing minds like his, we'll have something worth your time. The moment we lose that, the moment our children become small politicians instead of small humans, you'll know it's time to go back to sleep." The dragons considered this proposal carefully. They had learned much about humanity in these few days, and what they had learned was cautiously encouraging. These beings were flawed, as all sentient species were, but they possessed something rare, the capacity for genuine moral courage and the wisdom to value truth over comfort. "Very well," Ethermoon said finally, "but this friendship comes with conditions. No governments may know of our existence. No military organizations may study our technology. This relationship must remain between individuals, not institutions. Can you accept these terms?" "Absolutely," Elena replied without hesitation. "Then we accept your proposal. The Determination and her crew will be welcome here whenever you choose to visit. We will share what knowledge we can, and you will bring us news of the galaxy beyond our mountains." As the purple sun set over Valdris Prime for the last time during their stay, Elena gathered her crew for departure. The Determination hummed with new efficiency. its systems enhanced by dragon technology in ways that would take human engineers decades to fully understand. But the real transformation was not in the ship's capabilities. It was in the knowledge that somewhere among the stars, ancient wisdom slept lightly, ready to wake again if called by voices that spoke truth. Marcus pressed his face against the viewport as they lifted off, waving goodbye to the dragons who had become his friends. As Valdris Prime fell away below them, he turned to Elena with the serious expression that sometimes crossed his young face. "Captain Elena, when I grow up, can I come back and visit the dragons?" "If you still remember how to speak honestly," Elena replied. "I think they'd like that very much." The determination jumped to hyperspace, carrying more than just survivors of a crash. They carried the beginning of a relationship that would, in time, change humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. They had learned that the galaxy held ancient powers who valued truth above all else, and that sometimes the most profound connections could begin with something as simple as a child's honest tears. Behind them, on Valdris Prime, the dragons did not return to their long sleep. Instead, they began to prepare for visitors, because for the first time in 3 millennia, they had hoped that the galaxy might finally be ready for truth. And in the crystal caverns where they made their home, Ethermoon carefully preserved a single recording. The sound of a human child's honest crying that had awakened them from their dreams and reminded them that somewhere among the stars, innocence and truth could still exist. The dragons would wait and watch and hope that humanity would prove worthy of the gift they had been given. The knowledge that they were not alone, and that the universe still had room for those who chose truth over comfort, courage over convenience, and honesty over advantage. Time would tell if humans could keep that promise. But for now, a small boy looked out at the stars and dreamed of golden dragons, and that was enough.